This is Judith Lay saying Moromai and welcome as the island's Christian community is once again at your service.
Manx Radio.
And in the final edition of the programme for 2020, Bishop Peter looks back on a year like no other, and I find out why Clare Faulds spent Christmas Eve sleeping rough. But let's start with music, and this week we have two pieces recorded locally. Here's a popular carol sung for us by the choir of King William's College, directed by Steve Dakin, with organist Stuart Corrie. The choir of King William's College, directed by Steve Dakin, with organist Stuart Corrie, and O Little Town of Bethlehem. And there'll be more from the choir later in the programme. In just a few days, we'll be celebrating the start of another year, praying that it will bring peace, health, happiness, security, all the things that seem to be missing from 2020, a year that's been like no other. A few days ago, I invited the Right Reverend Peter Eagles, Lord Bishop of Sodor and Man, to reflect on the challenges that the year has presented. There's no book of rules to follow, no procedures in case of a pandemic, and yet, in this unique situation, decisions had to be made very quickly. So what influenced those decisions?
I guess the question would be, what are the priorities? What is it that's most important above all? So, the first answer to that question might have appeared to be, well, the most important thing is to continue to keep worship going, to keep churches open. And that's fair until you then consider perhaps that actually there may be something even more important than that, clearly is life and death and the risk to public health. When it becomes apparent that that priority has to supervene, then you really have no choice at all. And you have to make decisions very, very quickly. And that's fine. But I think, you can do that having asked yourself, what is the priority? What do I need to do most of all? So to close churches, not something that any bishop would want to do, but actually a self-evidently, in the interests of public health and safety, a correct decision to make at the time. And then to think, well, how do we continue to support and sustain people through that? There are a number of ways. One of them certainly is putting out digital services, streaming worship, giving online reflections for people to access if they wish. But then the other aspect of it, of course, is the continuing human contact, which is really difficult in those circumstances. So pastoral care then exercised at a distance, really, through telephone calls, through emails, through WhatsApp, and trying to keep an eye on each other as best we can under those circumstances. And maybe that is one of the lessons that we take from this, that it's possible to do that. We mustn't take each other for granted. We acknowledge that actually when something like this happens and we are all separated from each other, there's a real question about what is the nature of communication with each other? What's the nature of relationship? The ancient question, who is my neighbour? That question asked in the Gospels, who is my neighbour? Well, your neighbour is this person from whom now you're separated, but who you continue to think of, you continue to pray for, you continue to ring up, you continue perhaps to support as best you can by different ways. And a greater sense maybe of the connectedness of a community and of what the word neighbourhood really means.
Do you think that the church overnight really understood what mission is about?
Yes, I think, the question probably is a complex one. But maybe the reminder that came to us through this was that mission actually is an activity of love and of care, and therefore it will be to some extent spontaneous. You can plan as much as you like, you can spend all your time making preparations, but in the end, when it comes to it, what you give to your neighbour is something that comes from the heart and the soul as well as from the mind. And to that extent, it is spontaneous and it is genuine and it has integrity and it has humanity in it. There are still mixed views about suspending public worship, and for some people that was much more difficult than it was for others. Some people found that very hard to accept. And, as I've said, it's not something I would have wanted to do for a minute. But acknowledging that it was a decision that had to be made, it then strikes me that there are gifts to be found through that opportunity, through that challenge. And one of them is rediscovering, that nature of the essentially human aspect of mission and ministry.
Bishop, were you excited by the possibility that, as you streamed online your weekly Eucharist, that there could be people all over the world searching for something to hold on to, and they would find you and they would watch your service, they would take something from it? Suddenly, your ministry has got no bounds. Did you reflect on that at any stage?
I think only later, in all honesty. What I had in mind when I was speaking to the camera, as it were, and sending things out, which we did every day in one form or another through Holy Week, through Easter week, through the weeks beyond that. I guess what I had in mind was the people of our parishes, the people who I would normally be speaking to on those Sundays, and trying to say something that might be helpful to them. So it had to be tailored to the local context of what was happening in our own community, of what was happening in government in Tynwald, of what was happening in people's lives on the Isle of Man. But then, reflecting more deeply on that, of course, you understand the universality of the Christian gospel, and that actually what I say in this context may well have resonance in another part of the world, and for reasons that I don't necessarily understand or appreciate. And therefore, one puts it out there and leaves it to the workings of God's grace and trusts that God will take care of anything that I offer as God knows best.
We're often told that we're living in a secular society, and yet one of the analysis of the search engines revealed that 1 in 4 people searched for the word prayer. In what we're told is a secular world, that's something to build on, isn't it?
It is. That tells us something about human nature. I mean, that's universal as well. the idea that we need something other than our own immediate resources to help us through this. A sense that the challenges we face are beyond something that we can manage for ourselves. Therefore, we need to have recourse to that spiritual part of ourselves. And again, I think, want to say quite strongly that humanity consists of the mind and the body and the soul. We think and we reason and we are logical beings. We are sentient human beings who can feel things, who are capable of all sorts of external stimuli. But actually, they're also inside us, there is that spiritual aspect which asks those deeper questions. And those are the questions actually that go beyond reason and logic. Very often they have to. And if you were to say, well, what can reason and logic tell me about the challenges of this year? Well, it can tell us certain things, but it's not yet brought us through those challenges. We remain gratefully in this, on our island. We are well off at the moment, but we look at the worsening situation in the United Kingdom and Europe, and it strikes me that there has to be a spiritual response to that around prayer and around the sense of our awareness of the greater God over and above us.
Would it be relying on that spiritual dimension that you would ask us to do as we step out into what is at the moment still quite an uncertain new year?
That's it. And I think I would also want to say that nothing stands by itself. So, for example, the Christmas story does not just exist in its own right. Christmas only makes sense, in a way, when you link it with Easter and with the rest of the Christian story. By itself, Christmas is a wonderful thing. And we know that it was a historical event. We have the historical and the gospel records to tell us that. But actually, by itself, Christmas is just one part of the story. If that was all that happened, it would not be a great story. When you build it into everything that follows, to the ministry, the miracles, the teaching, the life, and then most of all the events of Holy Week and Easter and the resurrection, it's then that you understand the significance of Christmas. And similarly, I think I would want to say that what we've had this year is not a self-standing thing. It's part of that continuing human development, the continuing story. So perhaps next year we see the significance of some of this and we learn some of the lessons from it as well. And I think some of those lessons really are quite deep ones. We can't really talk about what the implications are going to be until we've let it settle down. So, for example, was the emergence of the virus in the first place to do with issues of stewardship, of husbandry, of resources, of greed, of food production? For example, was its spread to do with globalization, the ease of travel, all those things that we've now actually had to put on hold? This might cause us really to re-examine whether what we've been doing is the right way to live. So the question probably is as fundamental as that. So I'd be reluctant, I guess, to say, well, that's it. 2020 is finished. We move now into a new year. Well, we're just moving into really a new week, a new month, and perhaps some new opportunities, but some challenges as well. And we have to continue to be patient as we make our way through this. I've been keen on saying to people that I hope they have a peaceful Christmas, and I think I'd say a peaceful New Year as well. The idea of peace, the peace that God brings to us, that is a wonderful thing. And it's possible to enjoy peace while there are other challenges and difficulties around us. Actually, if we can find within our hearts, within ourselves, that sense of inner peace, then that is a wonderful thing. And I think here on our island at the moment, to some extent, we're able to do that in quite a privileged way. And I hope that that remains with us, and that we continue to have a deep care and concern for our neighbour on the adjacent island and elsewhere, across the world. We must do that. But at the same time, to be grateful for the blessings that we've been given, acknowledging that for many people it's really difficult to be on their own at Christmas and through into the new year. One understands that very deeply. But we know where we stand. We know that we are being looked after. And I think within that it's possible to find peace and contentment.
The choir, Men Aloud, featuring the younger, Boys Aloud, and a setting of the Lord's Prayer. Before that, I was talking with Bishop Peter as he reflected on the past year and what we might learn from the events and our responses. Now, bright and early on Christmas morning, I went to Maughold to talk with their church warden, Clare Faulds. I'd heard that Clare was planning a pilgrimage during the 4 weeks of December, and that she'd be walking from Rushen Abbey in the south to Maughold in the north, a distance of around 45 miles, that Clare planned to walk in stages, completing the final stage, Ramsey to Maughold, on Christmas Eve. The distance that Clare planned to walk is about half the distance that Mary and Joseph would have walked on their journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. But connecting with the story of the birth of Jesus wasn't the main reason for Clare's pilgrimage.
Well, I decided that I'd like to do something different in Advent, bearing in mind the people who are homeless and who have not enough for Christmas and not enough generally. So I decided that the way to raise awareness of that and to attempt to raise some money towards it would be to walk the pilgrimage in stages and in support of Housing Matters Isle of Man, the homeless charity, and the Isle of Man Food Bank.
So you set off, and obviously because of other commitments you couldn't do the 40-odd miles in the one go, so you're doing it stage by stage. Did you meet people on the way, or was it a very solitary experience?
No, it was far from the solitary experience that I expected. We started out from Rushen Abbey and walked through St Mark's and on to Moran on the first leg and ended up at St Runius, more or less in the dark. And people ask you what you're doing, and it's been met with very positive reaction. And in saying we walked, the first person that volunteered to help with me was a young man called Lewis, who I'd met through my connection with Rotary, and he has been helping with the food bank. And so I had a companion all the way, unexpectedly, and we debated all sorts of subjects while we were walking.
When you started off, Clare, you thought perhaps it would be a solitary experience. What were you expecting that you might feel, or did you have any expectation?
Yes, I suppose I expected to ponder my own thoughts. My husband is in the Falkland Islands at the moment, and he can't travel back here and I can't travel to him. And I suppose I was tending towards indulging my loneliness to some degree. And instead of that, we have considered completely different things. Lewis is a Roman Catholic, whereas I'm Anglican, and the stimulation of having somebody who brings a different perspective to the same faith, to the same subjects. And so we have debated many, many subjects, ethical, moral, religious, political, as we went. So it's been a pilgrimage in that I have walked a new journey instead of just thinking my own thoughts.
Do you think possibly this is one of the great blessings of pilgrimage, that you've got time? Because so often we can be having a fascinating conversation with somebody, look at our watch and say, well, I have to go now. You can explore things right to the natural end, can't you?
Absolutely. And because we were doing it in separate legs over several days, some of the things that we'd discuss would crystallise, and then we would go back to the subject, or we'd just move on from it. We tried to get a bus to a particular destination, but didn't make ourselves clear, and the bus took us too far. So we ended up having to walk to where we ought to be in the pitch dark and trying to find the path, and hadn't adequate torches and adequate light because we didn't think we were going to be walking so late. And actually, it was the essence of pilgrimage. It took us along an unknown path to the destination, not quite in the way that we expected. And it's encapsulated all that we learnt in 20 minutes of wrong route.
We're standing here in Maughold Church at the end of your walk, and next to us there are some shells. Traditionally, the shell was the symbol of the pilgrim, and also some stones. But these are beautifully decorated with Celtic symbolism.
Well, it started off with the thought about the ancient Celtic practice of taking a stone, usually a white stone, and placing it in somewhere sacred. And I picked up some white stones from the beach and decided to put a Christian symbol on them, taking a version of the Celtic cross. And then the thought developed that on each place that we would visit, we would leave a stone. I've usually drawn a Christian symbol of the cross in one form or another. And I also write on it, feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, and Rushen Abbey to Kirk Maughold, Pilgrimage, Advent 2020. I've no idea what happens to them. I've enjoyed painting the stones and putting some thought into the journey, even as I'm painting them for the different churches, thinking about what we've done and what we might next do, and making the point that it is about focusing on the homeless and the hungry.
But Clare's pilgrimage wasn't over when she got to Maughold on Christmas Eve. With overnight temperatures 3 degrees below freezing and only a very basic wooden shelter for protection, Clare slept rough. But how did people react when Clare told them of her plans?
Well, it was something that people rather disapproved of. I make no bones about it. I'm now over 70. And I was originally going to be alone. And I could see in their faces that they thought it was a crazy thing to do and sort of inappropriate and risky and so on. And I said, but I have a choice. And if it's difficult, I have keys. I can go home. There are people who have no choice. And as I said that, you would see their faces change, their attitudes change, because it was the dawning that there are men and women of my age and older and younger who do not have the option of going home. And they don't have the option of being able to take the equipment that I had. So I had early Christmas presents from concerned members of the family sending me suitably warm clothing. But the point is, I have a better understanding of quite what it's like to end up at 1 o'clock in the morning with nothing but a rather damp place to sleep.
Clare, we're in Kirk Maughold now. In a couple of moments, the morning communion for Christmas Day will be celebrated. You would be part of that. What will you be praying about this morning?
For those who are not as privileged as we are, my heart is very much with those who are in the UK at the moment, whose Christmas plans are in tatters. There is, however, the other side of it, that they will perhaps understand more the message of Christmas, the gift of God's Son that we celebrate on Christmas Day, and the fact that Mary and Joseph found themselves without accommodation. We start from nothing, and they started from nothing. It's a question of thinking about the great message of loving your neighbour as yourself.
More music from the choir of King William's College, directed by Steve Dakin with organist Stuart Corrie, and Adam Leigh Abounden, words written in the 15th century based on verses from the book of Genesis and set to music at a much later date by Boris Ord. And don't forget, I'd love to hear from you if you have a favourite hymn that you'd like me to include in a future programme. You can email me the details anytime. judithleigh@manxradio.com, and Leigh is spelt L-E-Y. Or you can write to me here at Manx Radio, P.O. Box 1368, Douglas IM 991SW. Now let's take a look at our notice board. And in Union Mills Methodist Church this afternoon at 2:45, there'll be music and readings by the Meadowside Choral Society, and that's followed by refreshments. And also in Union Mills on New Year's Eve, there'll be a watch night service led by Mrs. Margaret Newton. Light refreshments will be served from 11 p.m. On to St John's now, where the parish church and the Methodist Church are having a united service of carols in St John's Parish Church this morning at 11. Then on New Year's Eve, there'll be a social evening, starting with a faith supper at 8 p.m. in St John's Methodist Hall, and this will be followed by a watch night service at 11:30 in St John's Methodist Chapel. Back to today, and Bride Methodist Chapel have a covenant service with readings and carols this evening at 6:30. Selby Methodist Church have sculptures depicting the 12 days of Christmas on display in the church garden. You might like to take a look at them when you're in the area. The Methodist Church is at the crossroads opposite the Selby Glen Hotel. And on Saturday the 2nd of January, Crosby Silver Band will be in concert in Selby Methodist Church. Starting at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon, the concert is called Fanfare for the New Year, and admission on the door is just £5, which includes tea and cakes. St Thomas's Church in Finch Road here in Douglas have a star service tomorrow, Monday the 28th, at 3:30. This is specially for families who have suffered a miscarriage or the loss of a child. Still treasured, always remembered. And that's all that we have time for this morning. Thank you to my guests, Bishop Peter and Clare Faulds, and as always, my thanks to you for listening. I'll be back tonight at 9 with Sundown, but right now, this is Judith thinking of you, of those you love, and those that you're separated from now. I wish you a blessed and peaceful week, and when it comes, the happiest possible New Year. Bye-bye for now.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.